to do for the next hour or so is step you through this model that we developed. And I'm not going to tell you that this is the best model and it's the only one. There's a lot of these. I mean, everybody who's ever been an HR consultant has come up with their own model as to how to engage employees. But the reason I think this one's useful, and I've showed it to a lot of companies and they like it, is because it's based on 15 years of research and looking at a lot of topics. And I think I'll probably give you some things to think about that you didn't really realize are part of the employee experience. I think when it gets down to the end of it all, Maslow's hierarchy of needs is a pretty good rule for what engages people at work. Now, and we'll take this apart in a minute, but are we paying people enough that they can afford to eat, buy a house, pay their mortgage, send their kids to school? As you probably know, pay has a diminishing return. People with more money are not happier. The retention does not go up when you pay people more money. It does when you pay them a fair wage, but at some point there's a diminishing return to that because salary and benefits are usually in the level of physical needs. The second level of Maslow's hierarchy is safety. Can I go to the office? Can I go to work? Do I feel safe? And that's really issues of inclusion, diversity, fairness. Will people listen to me in a meeting if I speak up, if I'm a woman and I'm in an office where there's all men, or I'm a minority, or I'm from another country? These issues of inclusion are really safety issues, and they have an enormous impact, and I'll show you in the model where this fits in people's engagement at work. When I was at Deloitte, we did a lot of work on inclusion when I was at Deloitte. Deloitte's a fairly homogeneous company, but the Australian firm, where in Australia, I don't know if any of you have ever worked in Australia, diversity is a government mandated program, and it's in the diversity metrics are in the financial reports of all public companies in Australia. So it's very carefully regulated there. And we did a study in Deloitte where we asked, about 3 or 4 dozen work teams how inclusive they felt in their work environment amongst a work team. It wasn't the whole company, it was just a work team. And then also asked them how well they thought their team was performing. And there was a complete correlation between the sense of trust and inclusion and the sense of performance. The high in trust and high inclusion groups were 4 times more likely to report that they were high-performing teams. So we've done a lot of research on this. This is something that's kind of obvious. The third level of Maslow's hierarchy is love or belonging. And that's, the sense of, do I belong here? Do I have a friend at work, is what Gallup used to call it. Can I be myself? Can I wear the clothes that I'm comfortable with? Can I wear my hair the way I'm comfortable wearing it? Can I express myself in the words and the language that I would normally use at home at work? Those are a sense of family. Now, obviously there's limits to how much we're going to let people get away with at work, although I have to say, living in San Francisco, I don't think people dress up for work at all anymore where I live. There's that sense, and we'll talk about that when we get into the model. Then there's a sense of accomplishment. And, this is pretty high on Maslow's hierarchy. Am I progressing in my life? Now, there's an interesting piece of research that I found really, really profound. Have any of you read the book called The Progress Principle? Do you know that book? I guess it's not a very well-known book over here, but it's really a pretty popular book. It was written by a Harvard lecturer, and she studied the job logs, the written logs of hundreds and hundreds of workers in hourly, retail, and different white-collar positions. And what did they write about their day that they liked at the end of the day? What did they like and what did they not like? So it was just a personal observations. And she correlated it and statistically analyzed all these comments. And she found that the most common contributor to a positive day at work was having made progress, having accomplished something at work that they felt positive about, that helped either their job or other people or their team or their customers in some positive way. And that really struck me, because how many times have you gone home from work and realized, I didn't get anything done today at all? It was a wasted day. And it's the most frustrating thing. It's like, it's almost worse than having a bad day. And so it leads you to the conclusion that productivity is a measure of engagement. Feeling that you're getting work done, that you're actually finishing something, that you're contributing something, that you have actually made progress on your work is a very significant part of our engagement. And so that's why I keep bringing up this topic of productivity. And I actually think one of the things that is a challenge and maybe an inspiration for HR is, are you as an HR department contributing to productivity in your company, or are you getting in the way? And I've looked at an awful lot of HR things over the years, as an analyst, and they all look nice, but I'm not sure they're all making us more productive. I think they might be things that the HR department decided was worthy of doing, but I'm not sure if they contribute to work. So are you actually helping people accomplish their work and, of course, progress in their careers? And then the top of Maslow's hierarchy is self-actualization. Am I fulfilling my dreams as an individual, as a human being, as a family member, as a parent, whatever it may be? And those are issues of mission and purpose. And that's why, as I get through the model, you'll see about this, the more you can identify the mission and purpose of your company and relate that into human terms, the more engaged people will be. We had a bank, I was at a meeting at Deloitte last year, or maybe it was this year, and there were these HR people there, and they were the happiest, most happy, just wonderful people I ever met. There was just giant smiles on their face, having a great time. And I said, where do you guys work? Oh, we work for such and such a bank in Vancouver. I'm like, you work for a bank? A lot of banks aren't that happy. And they said, well, we're not really a bank. We're actually in the business of making our communities financially healthy and letting them fulfill their personal, financial, and family dreams. That's what we do. But we also sell mortgages, and we have checking accounts, and we have branches, and we have ATMs. But that's just the way we do it. What we're really here to do is to make the families in our communities more financially successful. I thought, this is kind of a brilliant way to describe what a bank does. Most banks don't think of themselves that way. They think about themselves as a profit-making enterprise that manages money and so forth. So there's all sorts of examples of that. So anyway, I just like to kind of go back to that, because I think this is a really good way to ground yourself. Okay, so this is the model. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but I'm going to take you through it in a little bit of one step at a time and just explain to you what these things are. So there's basically 6 dimensions to this employee experience. The work, and we'll talk about that. The management, meaning your direct management, your leadership. The work environment, the workplace, all of the artifacts of the workplace. Your health and well-being, your ability to grow, and your trust in leadership. So that's a lot, but I think it's valuable to go through this, because you might find some of these in your company are just fine, and some of them aren't. And I think it's instructive to look at them as a holistic view, because you might find that there's something you haven't thought about. Now, I think these tools like Gallup with the Q12 are useful statistical tools for engagement surveys, but if you really want to affect the employee experience, we're going to have to go through these in some detail. All right, meaningful work. In one of the surveys I just read from LinkedIn, we asked a couple thousand people, what are the things you like the most about your job? What are the things you like the least about your job? You know what scored the highest? What do you think was the most highly scored thing that people liked about their job? Colleagues. What else? Not the boss. What? Autonomy. Freedom. You know what it was? The nature of the work itself. Was the work something that I actually like doing, that I'm good at doing? It's so simple, a concept, but actually so profound. You know, the magic to enjoying your career and your work is to find a job that's fit for you. And, you know, if you're lucky enough in your, I mean, I've found that. I found that, you know, later in my career. I would say most of my career I didn't have that, but the last 10, 15 years I have. And in order for that to happen, that's actually kind of a complicated problem, because in most companies, the jobs are defined and the people fit into the jobs, not the jobs fit into the people. But there's a concept, there's actually a couple books written on this concept of job crafting, where you let the employee refine the job for them. And that actually isn't a bad idea. In a creative, service-oriented business, the employees know better than you do, and they certainly know better than a lot of the managers what needs to be done to make the job successful. And if you give them, autonomy is the right word, the freedom to flex the job, that will have an enormous impact on their engagement. And that's why I think this one might be the most important one. So let's talk a little bit about this. So I want to look at these slides, kind of remind myself what I got here. Yeah, okay. So the four factors in meaningful work are autonomy, selection, teams, and time. Okay, so everybody knows what autonomy means. Does your manager leave you alone? He's one way to think about it. And, you know, my experience in business and a lot of people I've talked to is that young managers, first-time managers, usually micromanage their people. They get in the way. They tell them what to do. They tell them what not to do. You know, they don't know any better. You know, you as an HR professional actually have a lot of influence on this by setting the rules of what managers do. We do get, actually, one of the most powerful things we have is in most companies, we're the ones that define the characteristics of management that is going to be rewarded. And empowerment is one that we can, you know, we can deal with, especially with new manager training and first-line manager and supervisory training. Okay, so that's number one. Number two is selection. It's funny, you know, I guess, you know, recruiting, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on recruiting because that could be 2 hours easily, but many different approaches to recruiting. You can recruit based on experience, you can recruit based on education, you can recruit based on tests. 30-40% of companies now do job-related tests to determine if you're going to be successful in the job, having references, having alumni in the organization that know the person, double-checking references, blind references, all sorts of things you can do to select people that you think are going to be successful in this job. What we found in this research, and we did a whole bunch of research on this, is that you don't really know who the right people are for the job unless you've studied the job. I had a conversation with one of the heads of talent acquisition for one of the largest oil companies, oil service companies in the United States, and I was asking him, you know, of all the things that you found predict the successful candidate when you recruit them, what is it? He said, it's by far only one thing. It's the recruiter. I said, what do you mean by that? He said, our best recruiters know exactly what it's like to work here. They know exactly what these jobs are like. They know what the day-to-day life is going to be like, and they have an uncanny way of figuring out who are the people that are going to fit into those jobs. Now, most recruiters are not that clued in, and a lot of times the recruiter is almost like a salesperson, and the manager, you know, writes a job description, sends it over to the recruiter, the group gets a bunch of candidates, comes back, and the recruiter's not that involved. We did find in our big study of recruiting, of talent acquisition, that one of the most important factors of success in recruiting is for the recruiters to be very, very close to the hiring managers and really spend a lot of time understanding the hiring managers. If you don't have that situation, or if you see this as a problem, you can do a study. And then let me give you an example of a study that a company did. We did a project with a retailer, and this particular company is a clothing retailer. And in this particular company, one of the and I think this is probably true with most retailers, one of the highest margin products they have is cosmetics. Cosmetics are a very high margin product. Have you ever noticed how big the cosmetic counter is? That's why, because they make all their money there. And so hiring great salespeople into the cosmetics counter is a really important job. And the rule of thumb for a cosmetic salesperson is it should be somebody who's very, very attractive and looks great with makeup on and makes people want to buy makeup because they look so nice. And so the company was having a lot of problems with the sales productivity and the turnover in this part of the retail operation. So they did a psychological study, and they did an assessment of the highest performing cosmetic salespeople. And they tried to figure everything they could about them. Where'd they go to school? What kind of job experience had they had in the past? Where had they, who were their mentors? Where did they live? How old were they? They did all this analysis. And they tried to correlate what were the statistical groupings that seemed to be most correlated towards people that were selling the most cosmetics. And what they found was that it had nothing to do with their height or their weight or their appearance or their hair color or any of that. It was actually intelligence. It was IQ. And that the most successful cosmetic salespeople were actually very intelligent, and they were very quick on their feet, because it turns out, I don't really know, I've never bought cosmetics, but that it's a very complicated business. There's a lot of options, and the cosmetic salespeople that are the smartest can very quickly assess a customer and very quickly determine the right product to recommend, because they're quick enough. Because I guess you walk right up to the person and you just kind of stand there right in front of them and you ask them what they should buy. You give them a lot of time. So it's a very, very tricky job. And they found out that by changing the assessment on that particular role, they could significantly improve the employee experience, the engagement, the retention, and the performance of those individuals. I'll give you another funny example on that, on the selection one. This one I always kind of remember too. We did a movie theater chain. You have movie theaters in Russia, right? You guys go to the movies? All the margins in the movie business are the popcorn and the candy. They don't make any money on the tickets. They barely pay for the movie on the tickets. So this particular movie chain was trying to figure out why some theaters were very profitable and some theaters were not very profitable. There was great concession sales in some locations and not in other locations. So somebody's trying to figure out why, and they found out, they did some exit surveys of the customers that had gone to the movies in those different theaters, and they found that the customers that were buying the most candy were the ones that were having the most fun. And when the theater was kind of fun-loving and enjoyable and everybody was having a good time, people would just go out and they'd spend $20 on candy and they wouldn't even think about it, and those were the theaters that were making all their money. So the head of HR had a brilliant idea. We're going to train our employees how to have more fun in the theaters. Okay, you can guess what happened. Complete flop, had no impact whatsoever, didn't change the pattern of the concession sales, didn't change the profitability, complete waste of money, wasted an entire year on that. And he said to me, one day I was standing in the shower and I just realized we can't train people to be happy. We have to hire happy people. And he said, and we're not assessing people based on their personality. We're assessing based on their job experience, whether they had extracurricular activities in school, their grade point average, all these things that have absolutely nothing to do with the success on this job. So I don't know how they went back and assessed it, but you know Southwest Airlines, you're familiar with Southwest Airlines? You know, in Southwest Airlines, one of the assessments to get a job there is you have to tell a joke to get a job because they want you to have a good sense of humor. I thought that was kind of a ridiculous thing when I heard about it, but now I understand it. So that's another example of this. So do you know teams? Let me talk about that for a minute. Now, I created this chart. I actually drew this chart by hand 3 or 4 years ago, and it's become one of the most popular charts in Deloitte. Because I was trying to figure out how to draw a picture of the way organizations have changed. Because we did a study in 2016, and you know, we go through these big, once a year we do this massive survey in Deloitte, and we ask people to prioritize their problems. And we're sitting around looking at this data. I was actually in India with a bunch of other people, and we're looking at this data and said, oh my God, the number one problem rated by these, you know, 10,000 people, the 10,000 business and HR people, was our organizational structure is getting in the way of us doing what we need to do. In other words, the way the company is organized is the problem, which, you know, I understand that. And so we started digging into that, and we started to talk to people and interview people. And what we basically discovered is something that's now been written about a lot, but I think we were maybe a little bit ahead of the curve, is that this is what your company looks like on the org chart. This is what your company looks like in the HR system. This is the way people get paid. This is the way people's job titles are set up. This is the way most of the HR practices were designed. But this is actually what happens. Most of the work we do, especially now in more digital businesses, is multifunctional. If you're a salesperson, you don't spend all your day with other salespeople. 1 minute you're talking to finance, the next minute you're talking to the professional services people, then you're talking to the product people, then you got to go to the executives to get approval on something. You know, then you're working with HR because you need some training. I mean, you're not working with these guys. You're working with a whole different group of people. If you're in product management, if you're in marketing, if you're in engineering, I mean, this is just the way businesses are. This is a historic artifact of an industrial corporation that makes money by scale. I mean, you know, most of the books of business that were written, and I'm very into this because I've been reading about all this stuff because I've been writing a book on it. You guys can read my book next year. It's a ways out yet. But the reason this exists, the reason all of these hierarchies were created was that all of the business models in the 1800s and the 1900s made more money through scale. When you're manufacturing a part or you're pumping oil out of the ground or you're selling cars, you want to create scalable manufacturing. You want to have uniformity in the manufacturing and sales and marketing. And so you organize the company by a hierarchy and you insert managers based on the number of people you have in each team. But when you're in a digital business and you make money through service and you make money through intellectual property and you make money through innovation and you make money through you know, business ecosystems and platforms and relationships with other companies, this isn't really the right way to do it. You still have hierarchy, of course, but you operate in cross-functional teams. And anyway, while we were doing this research 2 or 3 years ago, we stumbled across these companies that were using Agile, the Agile software methodology, in all sorts of different parts of business. They were using it in sales. They were using it in banking. You know, I've talked to probably half a dozen banks that have organized. I mean, look, think about a branch, a bank branch. A bank branch is a multifunctional business unit, right? A sales office is a multifunctional business unit. So anyway, this is a long story, but what we basically discovered is that the most engaging thing at work is, do you feel part of a team? Do you feel there is some team that you're a part of? And I actually just talked to, you all know who Marcus Buckingham is? I was just with Marcus Buckingham a couple of weeks ago, who's a Gallup researcher, a pretty well-respected Gallup guy. And he said he just did a big study of employee engagement, and they found that one of the biggest drivers of employee engagement is, do you feel like you are part of a team? And that team feels like it's part of you. So that's number 3, is there a team mentality? Is the management creating a team? Is there a sense of team in the organization? Okay, there's slides on that. And the 4th one is time. Do you have enough time to do your job? Now, that sounds kind of silly, and it's sort of a small issue, but let me give you an example of this. I mean, you would think that if you get people to work harder, they'll get more done, right? It's actually kind of the opposite. There was a study done in manufacturing in Germany, which I stumbled upon when I was doing all this research, that found that in many of the manufacturing plants in Germany where they were studying production lines, somewhere around 46 to 47 hours a week was the optimum number of hours to get the most amount of production out of the factory. Because above that, people were tired, they were making mistakes, they weren't cleaning the plant, they weren't fixing things that were broken. They were so busy working that they were actually creating problems at the same rate that they were fixing problems. And a lot of studies of retail have shown this. In the retail industry, and I think this is probably true in a lot of industries, there's a rule of thumb that labor is a cost, and the least number of people you can have in the store, the better for the cost of goods. And so, let's not bring too many people in the office today or into the store today because it's going to cost us too much money. But actually some work was done by some MIT professors to actually prove that that's not true, that when you overstaff a store, you actually make more money because people have more time and they spend more time with customers, they rearrange the shelves, they sweep the floors, they cross-train each other. When you have extra time at work, what do you do with your extra time? You do a little training, you help your neighbor, you talk to the person next to you you haven't talked to for 3 weeks because you've been so busy. It actually improves your productivity. So we put this in here because we wanted people to think about the fact that maybe you're understaffing some of your operations, and that could be a factor of engagement too. Okay, so that's the 4 factors in meaningful work. Okay, so that's number 1. You need a lot of lessons on management. I mean, most of you in HR spend a lot of time on this, but let me just touch on the things that we learned here. Number 1, goals. Now, there has been a 10-year debate about performance management during my time in the HR profession. Should we have performance appraisal? Should we have ratings? Should we have cascading goals? Should we not have cascading goals? Should we have OKRs? How many goals should we have? Should they be quantifiable? On and on and on. Most of the research I've done, most of the companies I've talked to, basically tell me that keep it simple. What's really important, and by the way, let the employees set their own goals. It doesn't have to come top down. There was a period of time in the early 2000s where companies were trying to build cascading goals. Do any of you do cascading goals anymore? Nobody does that anymore. Actually, bottom-up goals are better. The people that know best what goals they should have are actually the people doing the work. And they will, if you give them the opportunity to create their own goals, they'll set their own goals. And you'll learn a lot about what they consider to be important by letting them set goals and let the manager then work with them on the alignment of those goals with the rest of the organization. And the number 1 thing in engagement is clarity. Do I know at the end of the year, at the end of the period, what I'm being measured for, and is it clear? Do I even know what it is? I mean, I've probably been through 40 performance appraisals in my career, and I would say in most of them, I didn't really know how I was evaluated. Somebody just decided at the end of the year, here's your rating, and I'm not going to explain to you why this is, and let's just move on because nobody wanted to talk about it. Number 2, revisiting them. We've done a whole bunch of studies on this, and what we found is that the simplest thing that makes goals more engaging is reviewing them and revisiting them. They're not cast in concrete. They change. You know, you might have financial goals and budgets, and now there's a lot of ideas on how to do this, and one of the most popular ideas is what's called a check-in. And let me just show you this chart. I won't spend a lot of time on this because it's a little bit too complicated, but in most of the performance management research we've done, there's a process for setting goals, there's a process of quarterly reviews, there's a process of checking in on a regular basis. This looks very formal, but it doesn't have to be this formal. There's a process of giving people feedback, there's a process of giving people development, and there's a review. And that's kind of what continuous performance management is. All these things are going on all the time, not only at the end of the year. How many of you do once a year performance appraisals? How many of you do more frequent? Okay, great. You guys you're there. You know, sometimes I feel like very well proven. There's lots of studies. I could give you example after example after example of companies that have done this, that have seen, you know, dramatic improvements of engagement. One of the other things in the performance management process, and let me just take a minute on that, is philosophy. And if you went to your CEO, do you remember on the very first chart I showed you what's on CEOs' minds? About 2/3 of the way down was evaluating the performance of our people. Do you remember that was up there? I think you need to ask yourself, why do we do performance management? What is the goal of it? Is it to improve performance? Is it to evaluate people? Is it to weed people out? In this economy, it's probably a coaching process is what it should be. But it didn't used to be like that. A lot of companies built performance management processes that were designed to weed out the low performers and eliminate the people that weren't, you know, keeping up with everybody else. I mean, this is a cultural thing. I can't tell you how you're going to run your company, but the trend is absolutely away from that right now, given where we are in the economy and given where we are with employee engagement. So that's what's going on in performance management and goal setting. The third topic, invest in the development of managers. How many of you have first-line supervisory training programs? Your hands. I tell you, we've done a lot of research on leadership development, and the most important and most pivotal time when you can train and affect a leader is when they're a new leader. New leaders are becoming a first-time leader, a first-time supervisor, a first-time manager is probably one of the most difficult transitions people make in their careers. Because that's the first time in your career you realize that your success is dependent on other people. And your ability to influence and coach and align and support other people is now your job. It's not a sideline, it is your job. And teaching people the concepts of that, giving them the philosophies of that, making them feel comfortable in that role, showing them how they're going to be evaluated as managers, supporting them as managers is a really, really valuable tool you have. So of all the things you spend time on and money, I would make sure that your management development, supervisory development, first-line leadership development, whatever you call it, is, you know, getting a significant amount of your investment because it's where you have the most impact on the organization.